Look, it's a mommy dolphin with her baby. Look daddy! Yelled the little girl as she pulled her dark mane out of her face. Her father picked her up and threw her in the air. Just finished making the hot dogs guys, get them while they're still hot. Her mother yelled from the cabin and they ran to meet her. Suddenly, loud noises started coming from the boat engine. The boat started swerving violently to the sides and dishes started falling out of the cabinets. A radio fell to the floor and the channels were jamming, it was very loud and everything was confusing. It finally stopped jamming and it was playing music in another language. The little girl ran to her mother in the confusion, she had no idea what was happening. Guys, get your life jackets, I don't know what's happening. Blow up a lifeboat! Yelled her father as he tried to steer the boat. She had never felt such fear before, she was only 10. Her mother came running back from the cabin. They're gone. All the lifeboats, the life jackets. Nothing's there. She yelled in a panicked tone. She looked at her father trying to steer the boat back to land, but nothing was happening. I'll call for help. Someone might pick up. Yelled her mother as she ran back to the cabin. Suddenly one of the sails came loose and hit her mother over the head. She fell down unconscious, bleeding from her mouth. The little girl screamed and ran to her father who had given up trying to steer the boat. This doesn't make sense, the boat was brand new. He yelled. The little girl followed her father as he ran to open one of his suitcases in search of a cell phone. He threw the clothes out of the bag, frantically searching for his phones. Nothing here, this was a setup. He yelled, and a memory came flashing back to his mind. He just got off from work and went to the dock to check up on the new boat he'd bought. They'd be sailing that afternoon. As soon as he got into the cabin he saw his sister Catherine, he hadn't seen her in a long time. What are you doing? He asked as she turned to him suspiciously. Nothing, I just came to see you off but you weren't around when I got here, she said, smiling as she put something in her purse very quickly. It all started making sense to him. When Catherine was in his cabin, she had done this. Watch out! Yelled the little girl as she pulled at her father's shirt. The walls of the cabin started cracking and the roof fell through the side. He picked up the little girl and ran to where his wife lay. By now water had started leaking into the boat and it was going down. Wake up! Wake up! It's going down! Wake up! He yelled as he shook the body of his wife. The boat started sinking and he knew he had to create a lifeboat fast. The radio was still playing and very loudly at that. Wait here. Stay with your mother. He yelled to the little girl as he ran to look for anything that he could turn into a lifeboat. The boat was going down fast and he had to use whatever he could find. He broke the legs off of a table he found on the deck. It was large enough to hold 2 people, it was his best bet. The boat started filling up with water faster and the little girl screamed as she tried to keep her mother's head above the water. Her mother was still unconscious from the blow she had received. He threw the table into the sea and it surfaced, it was floating. He ran to pick up his wife and told his daughter to follow him. He jumped into the ocean and swam to the floating table with his wife. He placed her body on the table and it remained floating. He swam back to the boat for his daughter. You have to jump, Angel, I'll catch you. He yelled to his daughter as he extended his arms. She closed her eyes and jumped into the sea. He told her to hold onto his neck while he swam to the table where her mother lay. He helped her onto the table and just as he had thought it remained afloat. It was getting darker now and the girl started crying. I'll be right back, okay, don't be scared. He said and kissed his daughter on her forehead. He was about to swim back to the sinking boat to find anything to hold onto, but something held him back. He looked at his wife lying on the table and he reached to kiss her on her forehead, tears ran down his cheeks and he had no idea why. He looked at his daughter with a faint smile and swam back to the boat that was nearly underwater by now. He found a closet and broke the door off, he'd float on that. The radio was still playing, very loudly at that. It sounded like a mass choir but she had never heard the song before. He swam back to where his wife and daughter lay, but something pulled him under before he could reach them. Daddy! Yelled the little girl as she saw her father go under. A group of sharks circled around him and all she saw after that was blood coming up from the water and the closet door floating away with the suction caused by the boat. Daddy! Come back! I'll clean my room, Daddy, come back! Yelled the little girl frantically as she came to the understanding that her father wasn't going to resurface. She lay next to her mother who still hadn't woken from the concussion. No matter how much she screamed, her mother wasn't waking up. For the rest of that dark night in the middle of the sea, the little girl cried as loud as she could. She had come to believe that she was an orphan. She closed her eyes and prayed to Jesus. At least he could still hear her, she thought. A man in a black tuxedo walked over to Catherine Peterson. He whispered something in her ear and her face broke into a nauseating smile at the news. I'm in. Gracie ran to the kitchen to tell her parents the exciting news. I got in, Mom, look. Look. She exclaimed as she passed her mother the brown envelope that was roughly torn open. Next month I'll officially be a student of the Camelthorn Academy, the oldest school in Namibia. Do you guys know how many students were on that waiting list? Said Gracie, jumping up and down while her parents applauded. Where is that school? Is it the one in Klein Windhoek? Asked her mother as she passed the envelope to her father. Mom, it's at the coast, one of the oldest schools in the world. I'm so excited. Explained Gracie to her mother. We'll need to buy the uniform tomorrow. They give a list of the shops that sell Camelthorn uniform, and it's definitely not cheap, Sarah said her father to her mother as he read the acceptance letter. It never is these days. They even make the students pay for the toilet paper they use at the school. Replied her mother, and they all started laughing. What's for lunch? Asked Gracie's little sister Paige. I just got into the second most prestigious high school in the world, and the oldest school in Namibia. Replied Gracie as she mockingly marched towards her little sister with her hand on her heart. For real? You got into Camelthorn? Yelled Paige, and they both started jumping up and down, laughing. Yes, I got in, kid, and I'm totally taking along the camera. I'll take pictures of everything I see there. Replied Gracie, her voice trembling with excitement and joy. I'm going to tell everyone I know. My sister is going to Camelthorn. I'll totally make a blog post about this day. Yelled Paige as she ran to her room in excitement, forgetting her hunger. A week went past, and by now the entire city knew that Gracie got into the Camelthorn Academy. For the first time in her life, her picture appeared in the national newspaper. She and 20 other Namibian students were going to start their high school lives in one of the most celebrated educational institutions on earth. The 5 textbooks she needed were really expensive, but her parents withdrew money from their savings to cover the costs. Her father was so glad that Gracie's hard work had paid off. She would probably be the first member of her extended family to go to high school. Probably the only learner in her school to ever get into a high school like Camelthorn. Only the top students from the most prestigious high schools in Windhoek ever made the cut, and now a girl from the Tura was going to Camelthorn. They drove up to the Camelthorn busport. Her father had to give his ID to a police officer at the gate before they were allowed to drive in. Wow, this place is so VIP! Exclaimed Paige as she looked outside her window. There was an airport terminal at the busport. This was for students who'd be flying into Namibia from other countries to attend the Camelthorn Academy. These students were usually from England, America, and Asian countries. Parents who could afford to take their children to the best schools so that they could get into a place like Camelthorn. Gracie stared wide-eyed at the huge 3-story buses that looked like moving hotels. She would be going to the institution in one of these, and the only buses she'd ever been on were the dusty old school buses where kids would stick gum on the bottom of the seats. Her father and mother went to the register point to register Gracie. Since she was a scholarship student, they didn't have to pay for that. Paige took out the dusty old family camera and started taking pictures. Take a picture of that! Yelled Gracie as an airplane landed and students started getting off. She stared at the students who had just gotten off of the plane. Some of them were Asian, some from the Middle East, some black and some Indian. People from all over the world, it seemed. Gracie was so excited at the thought of all the new friends she would make at Camelthorn. A few more planes were landing and the kids started getting onto the buses. We've just finished registering you, Gracie. You'll be in grade 8B. Here is your timetable. I'm so proud of you, my baby, said her mother as she gave Gracie a big hug. Gracie could feel the excitement in her stomach like corn popping in the microwave. She went to get her 2 bags from the car. One was for clothes and the other for school books. She felt totally primitive having a grand total of 2 bags when kids were walking to the buses with huge suitcases that looked like they had golden zippers. Gracie noticed, probably for the first time, that there weren't many scholarship students there. I need the camera, kid, said Gracie to Paige, who was still taking pictures of everything around her. They laughed as they walked Gracie to the grade 8B bus terminal. Grade 8B only. This bus is for grade 8B only. Read the receipt you got to find your assigned bus. Yelled the squeaky voice of a lady over an intercom as they headed towards the bus. Such a huge bus for only one class. How many are you guys anyway? Asked Twa Page as she looked up at the enormous 3-story bus. I think that's my queue, guys. Exclaimed Gracie as she pointed to a queue that started forming at the entrance of the bus. What should I do with my bags? Asked Gracie as they moved towards the bus. Just keep them for now, only do what your teacher tells you to, instructed her father. Gracie moved to stand in the queue with the other kids, most of them clutching much bigger suitcases than hers. Bye guys, I'll call you when we arrive. Yelled Gracie to her family as she started moving with the queue. They waved at her and she smiled back at them till she could hardly see them because of the children that were joining the queue. Soon the big bus doors opened automatically and a very thin lady walked to the entrance of the bus. So you must be the new kids, I'm Mrs. Jurgens. I'll be in charge of all the grade 8Bs this year, so you better remember my face, kids. Yelled the lady as she looked up and down at the group of children with very thin, slanted eyes perched behind oversized glasses. You will place your bags at the top bag compartment next to the seat that you take. You will not bring any animals with you, and if I find a piece of gum on my bus floor, no one will leave this bus until it is clean. She yelled more strictly, as Gracie took in her gray woolen jersey that looked like it came from a black and white movie on that channel that old people watched. Gracie couldn't help but laugh as she remembered how children would stick gum under the seats of her old school bus. The lady then moved to the front of the bus and yelled for the children to enter. They all started getting on the bus, letting out oohs and wows as they took in the beauty and size of the bus. When Gracie finally got onto the bus, she could hardly grasp the sheer size of it. She'd never been on anything that big that actually moved. She had wanted to travel on a train one day, but this looked 10 times better than any train she had seen in the movies. As the bus started filling up, Gracie took a seat by one of the windows. She put her bags on the top compartment and was drawn to the scene of a young boy with brown hair crying and clutching onto a big woolly dog as his mother tried to pull him away. No dogs allowed, Anthony, but we will send you pictures of Dizzy's puppies as soon as she gives birth, his mother pleaded with him as she tried to get him away from the dog. Gracie started laughing at the scene but was interrupted when someone patted her on her shoulder. Is this seat taken? Asked a very tall girl with long black hair. No, you can have it, replied Gracie, noticing that she had only brought 2 small suitcases with her as well. Everyone brought huge suitcases with them, but we only brought along 2 bags, feels like we're totally unprepared, doesn't it? Remarked Gracie as the girl took her seat. I don't know about that, everything I own is pretty much in those bags, she said, pulling her hair out of her face. So you're here on scholarship? Me too. Exclaimed Gracie as she noticed that she was probably talking to the only other girl on the bus who was not a millionaire. Yeah, I'm a scholarship kid. My name is Yvette Van Rooij, she replied as she extended her hand to Gracie. My name is Grace Mbasova, but everyone calls me Gracie, she said as she shook Yvette's hand. They were both from Windhoek and shared stories of life in the city. They were soon joined by a girl who took a seat next to Yvette. Then the bus was off and the thin lady kept walking up and down the bus to make sure everyone behaved. She eventually got children to open their mouths and show her that they weren't chewing gum. Everyone laughed at that, but as soon as Miss Jurgens turned around they were as still as mice. The trip to the Camelthorn coast was a long one since they were making a stop at Swakopmund and then proceeding to the Camelthorn Academy. So what's your name? Mine is Gracie, said Gracie as she took in the thick afro of the girl who had sat next to Yvette. My name is Rosalinda Matabel, from Matabel Furniture. I'm the daughter of the owner, replied the girl. I'm Yvette Van Rooij, said Yvette, introducing herself to the girl. Where are you guys from? She asked as she took in their attire. We're both from Windhoek, here on scholarships, answered Yvette, and the girl gave a faint smile. My father also came to the school on a scholarship. When his business took off he vowed to bring all of his children here. I'm the firstborn, she said as she filed her nails. The rest of the trip was quite interesting, with American kids loudly complaining over enormous cell phones about how dry the Namibian landscape looks, and Miss Jurgens telling children to open their mouths and show her that they weren't chewing gum. Soon they were driving up a clear roadway between the ocean and the Camelthorn Academy. By now Gracie could see the other buses driving to the academy in a single file. Then she saw it. The huge brass gates were swung open and the buses entered the beautiful prehistoric campus that Gracie had only ever dreamt of seeing with her own eyes. She saw large cedar trees and enormous gardens. None of this looked like anything she had seen in Namibia before. As they drove into the campus, the kids ran to the left side of the bus to catch their first glimpses of the giant school building and the equally large boarding homes. "Sit down now. Back to your seats," yelled the squeaky voice of Miss Jurgens, and the kids ran back to their seats. By now one thing was established: no one was going to mess with Miss Jurgens. "As soon as the bus stops you will get your luggage and form a queue outside. No one will be talking on their cell phones," she yelled, staring directly at the American students who frantically started putting their iPhones away. Gracie saw the huge cider trees a bit better as soon as she got off and joined the queue behind Yvette. The trees were so tall that Gracie wondered how long they had been there. They moved in a sort of line to the school hall. A group of really hot Spanish girls got the guys to carry their luggage to the school hall. The hall was much larger than any hall Gracie had ever been in. On both sides of this enormous hall were rows of teachers sitting on a sort of balcony. The children entered and they filled the hall. Gracie looked around to see what looked like an ocean of cultures. She saw Asian children of all heights and skin tones, so she concluded that they were from different Asian countries. She saw Indian children, Irish children, Latin children, and of course Americans. It all seemed so confusing. She didn't know who to focus her gaze on because everyone she saw seemed so unlike anyone she'd seen in Namibia before. Soon someone grabbed her by the arm, nudging her. It was Yvette, and she had found seats for them, so she followed Yvette. They took seats in a row nearer to the podium, next to the most identical-looking twins that Gracie had ever seen. She took a seat next to one of the twins and they simultaneously turned to stare at Gracie. "That was so weird. Are you guys like telepathic twins or something?" asked Gracie, a bit startled. "No, we're just identical. I'm Sasha and she's Natasha," said one of the red-haired twins as she introduced her sister. "We're from Denmark, came yesterday. We're in second year, grade 9 for you," said Natasha as she leaned over to talk to Gracie. "I think Natasha is going to stay till the final year, but I might leave as soon as I get a better job proposal," said Sasha as she put her feet on one of her gigantic suitcases. "You can't get a job till you finish college, not a good job at least," replied Gracie as she pondered at how identical the twins looked. "Yes we can. At Camelthorn Academy we literally get many of the qualifications and credits we need to enter the workforce. Not like other high schools, very few Camelthorn graduates go to college because they simply don't need to. Why do you think this place is so expensive?" said Natasha, and she showed Gracie her grade 8 graduation certificate. Gracie could hardly decipher the complicated words written at the bottom, but she came to understand that Natasha had passed all of her subjects very well and they were only 5 at that. Yvette leaned over to look at Natasha's certificate and they were both amazed at how well she had passed. "You must have studied really hard to get such good marks," remarked Yvette as she looked at the certificate in Gracie's hand. "Not really, it's quite easy to pass here since the subjects we have are so few," answered Natasha. Gracie and Yvette looked at each other with hope and anticipation for what the year might hold. The hall started filling up faster and soon the doors were shut. Gracie remembered that she had to call her parents when she arrived, so she quickly called her mom and told her about the bus ride, Miss Jurgens, and the big hall. Soon the hall grew quiet, so Gracie said goodbye to her mom and hung up the phone. "Attention!" yelled a boy from the podium. He looked like he could be a senior. There were many other students on the stage by now. Sasha quickly leaned over to tell Gracie what was going on. "Those are the prefects, we elected them last year. That one is the head boy, Junior Velasquez, highest grades in school," Sasha said as she pointed to a boy on the stage with curly dark hair and a beard. "That's his twin sister Rosa Maria, she's the prettiest girl in the school. Also a prefect and head of the girls' youth group for Christ," continued Sasha, pointing to a very beautiful girl that had on a large pink woolen jersey. "By the way, this school is completely Christian. We read the Bible every morning at assembly. We don't really have a school anthem, we sing gospel songs, and we have an awesome choir that I'm totally gonna join this year," said Natasha, the other twin. "In case you'd like to know, the school was founded by a group of American missionaries and a few Guerrero men in 1908, so we do sing a lot of Guerrero songs at assembly, but we could help you pronounce the words," added Sasha. "I'm actually an Guerrero speaking person," said Gracie. "Then you'll have no problem fitting in," said Natasha as she looked up at the prefects. "Silence!" yelled one of the prefects, and the children got a bit softer but didn't stop chatting completely. "Wait, I thought there was an Guerrero genocide before 1990. said Yvette to Sasha. "Yes, there was one between 1904 and 1907. That's why the founding fathers of this school were not publicly acknowledged until 1991, the year after apartheid ended. The pictures of all the men who founded the school are in the gymnasium and the dining hall. Feels like you're in a different era when you look at the clothes people wore back in 1908. Said Sasha, and they all became silent as a man in a sports jersey walked onto the podium. Welcome back to the Camelthorn Academy, I hope you all had a great vacation. Said the man with a large grin over his face. The entire school gave a large applause after he had said that. That's Mr. Andrews, our principal. He's been the principal for 10 years, they say, whispered Natasha in Gracie's ear as everyone applauded Mr. Andrews. Dinner will be at 7 as usual. You will find copies of the yearly timetable at the entrance of the dining hall. I hope you can make the new learners feel welcomed. Said Mr. Andrews and cleared his throat. Now let's start our year off in the Camelthorn way. Everybody get on your knees, we are about to pray, continued Mr. Andrews. The kids in the hall kneeled to pray. Gracie was completely startled by how disciplined the school was. They all kneeled at once and not a murmur was heard in the entire hall. Gracie looked up to see all the learners' heads bowed. Even the prefects on the podium got on their knees and bowed in almost perfect symmetry. Close your eyes, said the principal, and Gracie bowed her head and closed her eyes. The principal said a long prayer, praying for a good year, health, and good relations between the students. He also prayed for the teachers and the prefects. All this I ask in the holy name of Jesus Christ. Amen, he concluded, and all the kids in the hall said amen. Have a nice day, and dinner is at 7, yelled the principal over the microphone as kids clamored to pick up their bags and get to the boarding homes. Yvette and Gracie picked up their bags and followed the twins. That building over there is David's dorm, the guys' boarding home. It was named after David Wilton, who had it designed after some building in Europe. They always give a long description of that. Never let the teachers find you there. Girls aren't allowed to go to the guys' dorms and guys aren't allowed to go to the girls' dorms, said Sasha as she pointed to a beautiful building that looked like a really huge work of art. Last year Catelyn Gaunt was found there with one of the final year boys. The J made her recite the Lord's Prayer 20 times, in front of the entire school. Added Natasha, and the twins laughed at the memory. Who's the J? Asked Yvette. That's Miss Jurgens, but all the kids call her the J. Her family has been in the school for 10 generations and all the kids know not to mess with the J, replied Natasha, giggling. Miss Jurgens said she's in charge of all the grade 8Bs this year. We are the grade 8Bs, said Gracie with a look of concern. Haha, you got the J. They got the J. Laughed Sasha, and all the girls who were standing nearby moved closer. You must be the first years, heard they were getting the J this year, said an Indian girl with her hair tied in a bun. All the girls started laughing and Gracie and Yvette had no idea what that meant. You guys need to know the rules if you're gonna have the J as your guardian teacher. Rule number 1, never chew gum in her presence. Swallow it. If you stick it under a bench or on a wall, the whole class gets detention. Said a tall girl with cornrows. Rule number 2, wear stockings instead of socks. If those socks don't reach your knees, she will make you walk back to your locker and get socks that reach your knees, said a chubby girl with curly blonde hair in a thick Irish accent. They were interrupted by the clanging of a bell. It was Miss Jurgens calling all the girls to order. All right. Grade 8s form a queue here, grade 9s next to them, grade 10s next to them, and so forth. Start moving, girls, we don't have all day, yelled Miss Jurgens as the girls started lining up. Gracie was amazed by the different nationalities that made up grade 8. Some were Indian, some looked Aboriginal, others were Asian, and she saw one that looked like she could be Ethiopian. She wondered if she was going to meet an G Herrero girl there, but for now she had Yvette as a friend and they made a good team. The girls started moving into the boarding home, the final years first. Everyone walked in a very neat line in an almost rehearsed order. This made Gracie understand that the school had very great order and that it was nothing like her primary school. Their turn to walk into the boarding home came, and as soon as Gracie got into the hall she let out a loud sigh. It was the most beautiful place she had ever been in. The curtains were very neatly folded and flower-like ribbons bound them. The floor shone and glistered, and there were enormous vases filled with the most beautiful flowers she had ever seen. It seemed like she was stepping into an old European-style palace. Everything she saw took her breath. Grade 8s will move to Extension 4. All the first years will move to Extension 4. Yelled the very strict voice of Miss Jurgens. One of the prefects stepped forward. Gracie remembered her from the assembly meeting earlier. She was head of a youth group for Christ. She remembered that much. My name is Rosa Maria Velasquez. I'm the head prefect for first years or grade 8. Please follow me, she said as she turned to walk to extension 4, dragging 2 very big suitcases behind her. The girls followed her down a very long hall with wonderful paintings on each side. Gracie didn't know where to look first, it was all so breathtaking. They entered a large room with beds and lockers for each learner. This is extension 4, choose a bed and start getting ready for dinner, she yelled in a very rich Spanish accent. The kids chose beds, many ran to choose beds nearer to the windows. The view of the lawn and large orange trees outside was beautiful to say the least, and everyone wanted a bed near a window. Gracie! Over here! Yelled Yvette, and Gracie turned to see where she was. She had also found them beds by a window. Gracie ran over to her and they started jumping on the beds and laughing. Each extension has a separate bathroom with 24 showers. Read the labels to find the extension 4 bathrooms. I have the key for the extension 4 bathroom, so if anyone wants to bath or use the toilet, get the key from me. You use your own towel and face cloth, if you don't have one I will give you one. The school provides blankets and duvets, but we wash them every weekend. Any questions you have, write them on the board near the door, yelled Rosa Maria over the noise of kids pointing at the beautiful lawn outside the window and jumping on the beds. Soon a really pale girl from China got the key from Rosa Maria and all the girls followed her to the bathroom. The bathroom was very beautiful with very large crystalline mirrors covering the walls on each side. The floor was very clean with glass-like tiles and the lights were really bright. Gracie felt like she was in a rich person's house. Many of the other girls hardly noticed the splendor around them, they were all used to that, it seemed. This was after all one of the most expensive schools in the world, and most of them were not there on scholarships. Check that out, said Yvette as she pointed to the sinks in the middle of the hall. The taps and sinks were made of pure glass with a golden line around the base. There were air fresheners on each wall and large air conditioners. It smelled like a boutique in the bathroom because the air fresheners were really strong. So this is how the other half lives, said Gracie to Yvette, and they laughed. As soon as they were done bathing, the girls ran back to their dorm room to prepare for dinner. It was really a very large bedroom with 10 life-size windows on each of the 2 corners facing outside. In one of the corners was a large whiteboard with the complaints of a lot of girls written with markers, and on the other side large mirrors with tiny diamonds along the sides. Suddenly Rosa Maria came back into the room fully dressed for dinner. The dress code for meals is on your acceptance letter, but I'll go through the dress codes with you. Breakfast is at 8 every morning and you are expected to wear your uniform to breakfast except on weekends, where you will wear a knee-length dress, long-sleeved shirt or jersey and any shoes of your choice, said Rosa Maria, who was dressed in a very pretty gown with her long curly hair worn down. For lunch you will wear a skirt that is below the knee, a t-shirt with sleeves that are not shorter than 30 centimeters and any shoe of your choice except high heels. Take that dress off, girl at the mirror, she continued as she addressed one of the girls in the room. She walked over to a girl in a silky green strapless dress. You cannot wear that dress at this school, you will get detention and I will be penalized for letting you walk out like that. Wear a jersey over that or find a dress with long sleeves, she said to the girl, who giggled and turned to the locker near her bed. You will wear long dresses that reach your ankles for dinner. At no point will any girl wear a sleeveless top to the dining hall. Not for sports, not for anything. Do you understand that? Said Rosa Maria as the evening bell rang for dinner. I'm glad we got that straightened out. It wasn't necessary for me to tell you this since you received this information in your acceptance letters, but because you are the first-year students you needed to hear it again. Carry the key to your locker on your arm or around your neck. No jewelry will be allowed at Camelthorn, so put away all earrings, bracelets, and necklaces. Now follow me to the dining hall, form a neat line, ladies, said Rosa Maria as she opened the dorm room doors and headed out. The girls formed a neat line, but some girls were still taking off their earrings and throwing them on their beds. Gracie understood now that Camelthorn was a very strict academy because she hadn't really read the rules. So what's your name? I'm Lily Clark, said a girl with very long blonde hair in a very rich Texan accent as she walked in the queue next to them. I'm Gracie and this is my friend Yvette, said Gracie as they all followed Rosa Maria to the dining hall. Hi Yvette, how do you pronounce that? She said and smiled at Yvette shyly, revealing deep dimples. It's Yvette, I really don't know what it means though, said Yvette looking down at Lily. My, you're really tall, aren't ya? Continued Lily as they got to the hall. Got it from my dad, answered Yvette as they joined the other kids standing before the dining hall. Suddenly Yvette got out of the queue, It seemed that she said something that she hadn't wanted to say. Lily and the other girls couldn't understand what was going on, so Gracie followed Yvette. "Hey, slow down girl," said Gracie when she finally reached Yvette, who had walked to a nearby fountain. They both sat on the edge of the fountain as they watched more children walking to the dining hall in neat queues. "I didn't realize that it had been that long since I talked about my father," said Yvette as she looked down at her dress. Gracie didn't understand what that meant, so she thought it would be best to keep quiet. The hall doors were finally opened by two of the prefects and the kids started going into the dining hall in their queues. "Hey, Alia! You two senoritas, join the queue!" yelled Rosa Maria. Gracie and Yvette ran to join their queue. They started walking into the hall in their separate queues. The boys were told to stand to the side so that the ladies could walk in first. Some boys started whistling when Lily walked by them. She giggled at this, but Junior, the head boy, wasn't impressed with these boys. As they got into the hall, the first years stood in amazement of the beautiful dining hall. Large tables with silky purple tablecloths lined each side of the dining hall. There were big windows with enormous white curtains that had the most beautiful embroidery Gracie had ever seen. At the front corner of the dining hall were three very large and beautifully decorated tables where all the teachers were already seated. The girls started taking their seats, the seniors first, followed by the fourth years all the way down to the first years. Gracie and Yvette took seats next to Rosalinda Matabel, the girl that they met on the bus. As soon as the girls were seated, the boys started walking into the dining hall and started taking their places. It seemed like the seniors were taking their seats first, just like the girls had done it. As soon as all the boys were seated, the prefects closed the doors and headed to a very large table at the other end of the dining hall, near to where all the first years were seated. The prefect table was long and had a silky yellow cloth over it with white frills along the sides. It was very well decorated and Gracie thought that entire place was a feast for the eyes. The prefects remained standing, however, and soon the entire dining hall was told to stand. The principal, Mr. Andrews, stepped forward and told everyone to bow their heads so that they could pray. He said a prayer blessing their food, and when he was done he told everyone to take their seats again. Gracie noticed all the girls giggling as they looked at one specific prefect on the prefect table. Some of the final year girls and about all the fourth year girls had their eyes fixed on one prefect in particular, it seemed. Gracie and Yvette turned to see who was causing all this commotion. They couldn't tell who it was, but then one of the male prefects stood up to fix his tuxedo and all the final year girls seemed to giggle at once. They finally saw who all the girls were staring at. He was a very handsome Indian prefect with straight black hair that reached his shoulders. Gracie could understand why they were staring since he was very pretty, but it still seemed a bit strange to her 13-year-old mind. Yvette didn't seem all that impressed and stared at the beautiful flower vases instead. "Where's the food?" asked Yvette, and Gracie started wondering about that as well. Soon the waiters started walking in with the dinner trays. They served the teachers first and then went down to serve the students. The waiters all looked very well dressed and Gracie was really impressed at all of this. "They have people serve them. This school is fresh," said Gracie, and they all started laughing. The waiters started serving the students, placing large dishes of turkey and salads and barbecue and many more things on their tables. The students could choose what they wanted to take from, and Gracie felt so grown up. The prefects were getting served at about the same time that the students were getting served. Rosa Maria tied her hair in a bun and Gracie noticed how beautiful she was. She remembered the twins saying that she was the prettiest girl in the school, and she probably was. She then looked back to their dinner table and saw the waiters place a large bowl of sausages with crisps on their table. Many other things were put on their table and Gracie had no idea where to start. She tried everything and so did Yvette. Most of the other kids were eating very little for reasons Gracie could not understand. As soon as lunch was over, another prayer was made by Mr. Andrews and the prefects opened the doors. Girls were first to leave, followed by the boys. Gracie and Yvette ran to their beds once they got to their dorm room. "I think all these girls will be hungry by midnight. Did you see how little they were eating?" asked Gracie, and Yvette started laughing. "Get ready for bed, bambinas, I'm switching the lights off in 20 minutes. Yelled Rosa Maria, and the kids started running to the lockers near their beds to get their pajamas. Gracie and Yvette got in their pajamas and started reminiscing about the beautiful dining hall and the prefects. "All right, lights out. My alarm goes off at 7 a.m. and I expect you to run to the showers when my alarm goes off," yelled Rosa Maria and switched off the lights. She went to a small room at the far edge of the gigantic dorm room. As soon as she had closed her door and put off her lights, the kids went back to discussing the evening and the new school. "I can still hear you. yelled Rosa Maria in her trademark Spanish accent, and all the girls became quiet again. Soon they all fell asleep and the dorm room grew very still. Yvette couldn't sleep properly. It had been such a long time since she had mentioned her father. She was getting really tired from turning around restlessly, and she eventually fell asleep. She saw it again. She was 10 years old and her father was throwing her in the air. She couldn't believe that she was looking at her father again. She was so happy. The way she had been that day. She saw her mother. She couldn't hear much, but it was a beautiful day. Suddenly things went wrong. The boat was sinking. She remembered it all so well. The screams, her mother. Then it came. All she could hear was the radio playing, the blood in the water. No! Yelled Yvette, and half the dorm room woke up. Girls started switching on their cell phones to see what the commotion was about, and others sat up in their beds. It was all so confusing and Gracie couldn't understand what was going on. It was late. Yvette grabbed her phone and ran out of the room. Most of the girls went back to sleep and Rosa Maria came out of her room to tell the girls to sleep. Yvette ran to the staircase and held onto it as tears streamed down her face. She told herself she would never remember that day again. She dialed her mother's number and sat on the staircase as she waited for her to pick up the phone. She waited for a while, then someone answered. Hello? Yvette, is dit Jai? Answered her mother, half asleep. Ja disi ke ma, said Yvette as she cried. What het Kabir? Asked her mother as she sat up in her bed. Yvette cried like she was 10 years old again. She cried for all those years without her father. She couldn't say anything but cry. Her mother instinctively knew why she was crying and started crying as well. Hi's met die here, said her mother tearfully in an attempt to calm her daughter down. They both cried over the phone. Hardly anything was said, but somehow in the tears they shed that night nothing needed to be said. For some shocking reason Yvette could hear the radio playing in her head like it did that night. Many tears fell that night. Gon slape no my kind, more is school. Moani verjeet om to bidnai, said her mother, trying to restrain her tears for the sake of her child. Non, said Yvette, and she hung up the phone and went back to her dorm room. All the girls were asleep, so she moved quietly to her bed and tried to wipe the tears off of her face. She turned her pillow around, to the side that wasn't wet. She said a prayer and after a while she fell asleep again. A loud alarm went off in their dorm room at about 7 a.m. and all the girls woke up. Some girls had woken up earlier and were already in the showers. Gracie and Yvette ran to the showers and got dressed after that. They put on their school dresses, which were unusually beautiful for school dresses. Knee-length dresses made of dark blue silk, a black leather belt and blue stockings. At least I won't have to be ironing this, said a girl from Mozambique as she strapped her dress up. They wore black flats and the dresses had 5-centimeter seams. Some chose to wear their jerseys that day. Why aren't we wearing ties? Asked Gracie to Rosa Maria, who was dressed in a much longer school dress. Only boys wear ties at Camelthorn High and only female prefects wear these long gowns. Form 2Q's girls, said Rosa Maria as she opened the dorm room doors to let the girls out. The girls walked out and saw other students Form Q's in similar beautiful silk school dresses. Miss Rosa Maria, when will we get blazers? We couldn't find female blazers at the shops, asked a really chubby girl with long black curly hair from Hawaii. Women do not wear male clothing at Camelthorn High. Neither do men wear female clothing. There is a very clear definition between boys and girls at this school, and they aren't even allowed to swim in the same swimming pool. Public pools are for outside this institution, but things are very different at Camelthorn High, replied Rosa Maria as the girls made their way to the dining hall. Gracie felt pleased about hearing that there are separate swimming pools for boys and girls. Now she could get out of the pool without worrying if all the boys could see her nipples. She had large breasts and that was always a problem for her, but now she wouldn't have to worry about that, and she felt very relieved. This was after all the oldest Christian academy in the country and one of the oldest schools in the world. If things were going to be done properly and in a decent way, they would be done properly at a school such as this. Boys came to the dining hall in their cues wearing navy blue blazers with the school emblem on them. They also wore beautiful navy blue trousers made of pure silk. The large doors were opened and the girls started entering in by their grades while the boys stood in a line as they walked by. This place smells divine, said a girl with pigtails from Botswana. Every morning we have muffins with whatever cereal or choice of bread we would like. None of the final year girls eat muffins though, they say it's fattening or something like that, explained a third-year girl from Angola as they took their seats. More for us then, said Yvette, and they started laughing. The students were soon told to stand for the morning prayer. After they had eaten and used the bathrooms, they went to the school hall for the beginning of the first day of school. All the students wore the beautiful silk uniform that shone in the Namibian sun. Gracie saw Mr. Andrews in a large grey coat and round spectacles that looked like they were made last century. She imagined how old Mr. Andrews could have been like back when he was younger, but her thoughts were interrupted when she bumped into a girl. To her surprise, it was one of the red-haired twins that she had met the first day. She just couldn't tell which one it was. "Hi Natasha," said Gracie, taking a wild guess since she had no idea which twin that was. "Hi Gracie, I'm so glad you remembered me. Most people could never tell if they're speaking to Sasha or to me. High five." Gracie gave her a high five and secretly laughed at the irony of it all. Sasha soon joined them and sat beside Yvette. The hall started getting fuller and soon all the students were told to stand. "What's happening now?" asked Yvette as she turned towards Sasha. "Now we have Bible reading. We read the Bible before school begins every weekday. The prefects hand Bibles to all the children while we sing our Bible reading song," said Sasha as the teachers started standing up. "The song is called Ancient Words, Sasha, for the 50th time. There's the school choir, by the way, which I'm going to try for next week," said Natasha as she pointed to a group of pupils gathering on the stage. They wore beautiful silver robes with golden collars and Gracie loved that. Soon the words of the song appeared on a large screen and a piano started playing. Gracie noticed the piano for the first time and saw a girl with long blonde hair playing it. As they started singing, the prefects were handing Bibles to the students. "Words of life, words of hope. Give us strength, help us grow," the school sang, and they all seemed to know the words of the song. Gracie sang along, reading the words from the giant screen at the front of the hall. "Ancient words, ever true, changing me and changing you. We have come with open hearts, oh let the ancient words impart," she sang and grew to like the song as they went along. Soon after the song was sang, Mr. Andrews said a prayer and the Bible was read. Mr. Andrews called a student to the stage to read the day's passage. Gracie liked the way the Bibles looked, very old King James Bibles with dusty brown leather covers. After that the prefects assembled the Bibles and Mr. Andrews got onto the stage again. "Praise God for this day, the first day of our school year. Who's happy to be back at Camelthorn High," he said, and immediately after that the entire school broke out in cheering and applause. "Last year you voted for our student leadership body, or school prefects as you guys most commonly call them. I will read out the names of the students who got elected as school prefects. Our head boy and head girl will be Junior Velasquez and Jennifer Vizaru Amunganda." Everybody gave a round of applause as Junior and a girl with two pigtails stepped forward. Gracie loved how the prefects were dressed. The head boy and head girl both wore shiny golden pendants on their chests. As for the other prefects, the boys wore school blazers that had a green amulet sewed in on the right shoulder. The girls wore long silk gowns with green amulets sewed in around their waist belts. It was a beautiful sight. Our prefects in charge of the students in their years will be as follows. For final years the prefects assigned will be George Govender and Alicia Venter. "Please step forward," he announced, and the prefects stepped forward as their names were called. Gracie noticed that George was the handsome Indian prefect that all the final year girls were staring at in the dining hall. He had cut his long hair really short, but all the girls still giggled and pointed when he stepped forward. For fourth year, the prefects in charge will be Pietro Contadino and Una Sheriff. For the third years the prefects in charge will be Akiyama Hamasaki and Emily Newton. All the Asian students applauded very loudly when Mr. Andrews read those names. "Quiet down now, order. The prefects in charge for the second years will be Colin Kaidi and Valeria Bazanov. Finally, the prefects in charge of the first years will be Jason Hill and Rosa Maria Velasquez." As soon as they stepped forward, the boys in the hall started whistling and making catcalls at Rosa Maria. "That's enough now, order in the hall," yelled Mr. Andrews, and the students became a bit quieter. "I hope that you have all received your timetables by now, but in case you haven't, Mary Kevinson is handing them out at the back of the hall. When the bell rings you are to move to your first lesson. Have a nice day, children, and do try to enjoy the school year," concluded Mr. Andrews, and the children cheered. Soon after that the bell rang. As the children were moving out of the hall, most of them were getting their timetables from Mary Kevinson, who was seated behind a large brown table with the timetables assigned for each class packed in a very neat order. She had curly brown hair tied in the neatest bun and strangely carried her knitting work with her. Gracie found this odd as she was moving in a queue to collect her timetable. "By the way, that girl there, Mary Kevinson, she's always knitting. Most of her clothes were knit either by her or her mother. Last year she got detention because she started knitting while she was in the exam hall with other kids still busy writing exams. Till this day no one knows what she was knitting in there, said Sasha to Gracie, and everyone in the queue started laughing. I heard she smuggled her knitting equipment into the exam hall under her jersey, said a South African girl in the queue, and the children continued to laugh. Once Gracie and Yvette had gotten their timetables, they went down the hall looking for their class. Their first subject was agricultural studies at room 53. How on earth will we find room 53, and what exactly is agricultural studies about? Asked Yvette as they walked down the long school halls looking for class 53. It says here that the subject is about growing plants and food producing crop in order to grow our own food one day. This is so cool, said Gracie as she read their timetable. Yeah, I'd like to grow my own food one day. I'm so done with fast food. My mom told me that a lady in America found a dead rat on her plate in a fast food restaurant. I don't even want to know if they use rats to make burgers over there, said Yvette as they peered into the different classes that already seemed to be in session. Yuck. I wish I never heard that. You don't want to know what I'm imagining right now, said Gracie with a look of disgust on her face. The perils of eating pre-made food. Hey, I think that's our class, said Yvette, pointing to a room at the end of the hall. Yeah, that's 53. Let's run, I'm sure we're super late, said Gracie, and they both ran to room 53. Once they got there, the kids were chatting and sitting on benches. There seemed to be no teacher in the classroom. Before they could get in, a short girl with curly long hair came running to them. Stop right there, you two. Name, country of origin and hobby please, she said, and Gracie looked at Yvette pretty startled. I'm Yvette and this is Gracie, my friend. We're both from Namibia, answered Yvette, a bit puzzled by this. Locals, I see. That would put you on that table near the window. They're all Namibian and I'm sure you could relate. Any hobbies? She asked, looking at Gracie. Netball, I think, Gracie replied, looking at Yvette. That's like basketball, right? Then your best bet would be that table over there. Those are pretty much the sport fanatic chicks. They play anything from tennis to hockey. You'll get along well with them, she said, pointing to a table where girls were busy arm wrestling and bouncing tennis balls around the floor. Haha, how did you do that? Do you know everyone in this class? Asked Yvette, a bit surprised. I got to know everybody in the days since I got here. Penny Baxter, at your service, ma'am, she said in joking tone and held out her hand to Yvette. Yvette shook her hand, very surprised by all of this, and Gracie started laughing. Let me fill you in on all that you need to know in order to survive grade 8B, or first year depending on where you're from. Over there we have the bookworms. They've read every textbook in the school curriculum before they got here. You could literally ask them anything about any subject, she said, pointing to a group of 3 guys and 2 girls at the back of the classroom. Over there we have the rich kids. It might seem like everyone at this school is pretty rich, but those kids are like billionaires. Do not look at them, and if they do catch you looking at them, start smiling and waving as fast as you can, she said, pointing to a group of 5 children who looked very well dressed, and Gracie remembered one of them, Rosalinda Matabel. As soon as the rich kids noticed them, Gracie, Yvette, and Penny started waving at them almost automatically. Gracie laughed at all of this. And there we have the chess legends. They know everything about chess, all they talk about is chess. Despite their charming appearance, do not play a game of chess with any of them at any point, because you will lose, she said as she pointed to 3 guys who seemed to be caught in a really deep conversation about a chess bishop. I also got to know some kids in the A and C classes, by the way. First years are divided in 3 classes, namely the A, B and C classes. What I heard from that Russian prefect, Valeria, said Penny, and continued pointing out the groups in the class. That group is your MTV group. They basically think they are on a reality show. They talk with purely American accents. 2 of them are American though. Never start a conversation with any of them, it's hard to make out what they are saying, she said, pointing to a group of 3 boys and 4 girls gathered at the front of the room talking about the best fast food places they know. Gracie laughed like she had never laughed before. It seemed to her that Penny had no idea how funny she was. It also seemed like Yvette was trying to contain her laughter, but soon she started laughing as well. Finally we have the most girly girls you will ever meet. They are 5 girls from 5 different countries who have one thing in common: extreme girliness. All their clothes always match, they have the brightest little clip-a things in their hair, and everything they own is pink, Penny concluded, and pointed to 5 really pretty girls that were stuck in a really deep conversation about cats. I think cats are better than dogs because they eat less, said one of the girly girls, and all the other girls agreed almost simultaneously. Gracie remembered one of the girls. She was Lily Clark, the girl from Texas she had met at the dining hall. A guy at the door announced that a teacher was coming and all the children started running to any open chair they could find, with some attempting to clean up the class. Finally the teacher got to the class. He was a big man with a large potbelly that made it seem like his t-shirt was about to tear open. He wore really dirty shorts and socks pulled up to his knees. Gracie had no idea what was funnier, the leather sandals he was wearing with his socks or the dusty old cowboy hat he wore that made everything else look that much funnier. Some of the kids were giggling but others were laughing. "Good morning 8th graders, I'm Meneer Koosverwider. I'll be your agriculture teacher for this year," he said as he took off his dusty cowboy hat revealing very thick brown hair. He started writing on the board and the kids went back to chatting and passing each other notes while he did that. "Stilty. Keep quiet," he yelled as he hit a large ruler on the front desk. "I wrote my name on the board for those of you who don't know how to pronounce it. Write it down if you need to. Today we will have our first lesson in the school gardens. We will discuss apples and how to know if they are ripe. Follow me," he said and turned to leave the class. Children started getting up and ran to follow him to the school gardens. Other children were still writing down his name. Gracie ran to join those who had followed Mr. Verwider to a large garden that had a large metallic fence around it. He opened the big silver lock on the gate with a key that he carried around his neck. Gracie couldn't believe her eyes once the children started getting into the garden. It was a beautiful display of herbs and flowers and a lot of other plants she didn't know. "This place is awesome," said someone from right behind her, and Gracie turned around startled. It was one of the chess legend boys. She remembered that much. He stared at her almost expecting her to say something, but Gracie only smiled. She was puzzled by this and he noticed, so he introduced himself. "My name is Henry Bannister, I'm from the UK," he said as he shook Gracie's hand. "I am Gracie, and there's a huge bug on your shoulder," she exclaimed as a giant beetle was crawling up his shoulder. He quickly shook it off and seemed unbothered by this. "I used to collect beetles and put them in a jar when I was a kid," he laughingly said, and Gracie got grossed out by the thought of anyone playing with bugs. "Yuck," she said, and he continued laughing. Soon the teacher called all the children to order and showed them an apple tree. They discussed apples for the rest of the period, with the group of girls spraying some kind of sanitizer over themselves and politely complaining about walking through dirt in their brand new school shoes. As soon as the school bell rang, the learners moved with the other learners down the hall towards their next class, Human Resource Management. "It's in room 28, must be downstairs. Let's run so that we can get seats in the front," said Yvette to Gracie as they dusted their shoes on the gravel pavement outside. The hall seemed so immensely full of children that Gracie could barely see where she was going, but Yvette seemed to find her way much easier since she was really tall. They finally got to class number 28 and it seemed as if half the students were already there. No teacher was in the class when they got there, and the sport fanatic chicks seemed to be in real awe of a treadmill at the back of the classroom. Gracie couldn't understand what a treadmill was doing in the class, but soon she saw a huge flat screen TV at the front and realized that this wasn't an average classroom. This all made her more excited about what the lesson was going to be. Soon the class filled up and a teacher walked into the class. She looked like a college student more than an actual teacher. She wore a silk headband and a long bohemian wraparound dress with a pink woolen sweatshirt and some beautifully beaded t-shirt underneath that. She looked way too hip to be anyone's teacher. "Yo, what's up kids? Welcome to ya first year at de Camelthorn Paradise," she said in a typical Jamaican accent. The kids cheered, with some of them shouting "J.A. man," in mock Jamaican accents. She introduced herself as Miss Lillian Brown, and it turned out that she was from Jamaica. Gracie was in huge anticipation for what the subject was about, but the teacher said they'd only be getting to know each other that day. One by one the kids were told to stand up and introduce themselves. When it came for the chance of a girl at the back of the class to stand up, some of the guys started laughing and making funny noises. Gracie remembered her as one of the bookworms who had read all the books before they got there. She was really fat, probably the fattest girl in class, and the boys were making rude noises when she started introducing herself. The teacher told the kids to keep quiet and asked her to introduce herself all over again. She shrugged and cleared her throat. "My name is Francesca Pinto. I come from Italy," she murmured, looking intently at her feet, and as soon as she was done she sat down. One guy in the class shouted out "Porky" when she was done introducing herself, and the teacher told him off for doing that. Gracie felt sad for her and looked at Yvette, who had her hand over her mouth. This all probably shocked her more. As soon as the children were done introducing themselves, they played word games with the teacher to get to know each other better. It was a lot of fun and the children all liked their new teacher. The bell soon rang and they had to go to their next class, Economic Studies, which was in room 29 just next door. The children got into the class and got into their different groups as usual. The teacher wasn't in the class yet, so Gracie and Yvette ran around the class looking for the best chairs to sit on. It was great fun and eventually they found nice chairs by the windows next to the chess boys. She remembered Henry Bannister from before and smiled to greet him. "Hi Gracie, still scared of beetles?" he asked her in a very English accent and she turned to him. "Bugs are nasty, it's a girl thing," she said and they all laughed. "So what's the deal with the Francesca girl, do people hate her?" asked Yvette as she still couldn't get what happened in human resource class off of her mind. "If being fat is a crime, then they probably do," said one of the boys as he was sharpening a pencil. Gracie and Yvette looked at each other and couldn't say anything after that. Soon the teacher walked into the class. He introduced himself as Mr. Finnegan, a rather well-spoken man with a bald spot at the top of his head and mustache that looked gray. He looked very old and just as Gracie had thought he was very old. He told the children a couple of stories about how he had spent most of his life teaching at Camelthorn. Gracie thought it was interesting but some children found it boring and they gave loud sighs and rolled their eyes. As soon as he was done telling the children these stories he went on to explain the school schedule they'd have to get used to. That every day they would have only 3 periods and that they had only 5 subjects in total. He explained to them that school started at exactly 7 a.m. and being late meant detention. Gracie wrote down everything the teacher was saying and soon the final bell rang and the children left for their boarding homes. Some of the children went to their homes or apartments in Swakopmund and she noticed that Henry Bannister was one of those. Boarding fees were pretty expensive and many students weren't there on scholarships. Once the children got to their dorm rooms some of them ran to the showers. "You guys could take a bath now, lunch is at 1 p.m. and we go to the dining hall in our school uniforms. You have less than 2 hours to get ready for lunch so look busy," yelled Rosa Maria as Gracie and Yvette ran to their beds. "Gracie, check this out. Today after school we have tryouts for tennis and basketball," said Yvette as she jumped around with excitement showing the schedule to Gracie. "This is awesome," yelled Gracie as she took the timetable from Yvette. "And we have swimming lessons tomorrow. How cool is this place?" continued Gracie as she kept reading the timetable. They spent about an hour discussing the tennis tryouts with girls from Barcelona showing the girls what their tennis rackets looked like, very posh rackets at that. Soon the bell rang and they were off to the dining hall with Rosa Maria telling 3 girls to take off their necklaces. "No jewelry at Camelthorn, put them away or I'm taking them to the welding machines in the trade workshop," yelled Rosa Maria and 3 of the girls started taking off their necklaces. While they were walking to the dining hall Yvette introduced Gracie to a girl she had met earlier. She was also in first year. "Gracie, meet Sandra, she's from Turkey," she said as she introduced the girl in front of her. "Hi, which city in Turkey are you from?" asked Gracie as Sandra turned towards her. "I'm from Antakya, or Antioch if you'd like. I am scholarship student," she said in a very Turkish accent and they could hardly make out what she was saying. After a while Gracie got used to talking to her and could make out some of what she was saying. They soon got to the dining hall and the girls walked in first. The prayers were made and the waiters started bringing in the food. Gracie and Yvette sat next to Francesca Pinto this time and talked to her about the tennis tryouts. "That is my favorite sport, I used to play tennis when I was in elementary school," she said in a very Italian accent. "I never really saw a tennis court till I was 12, and that was only by accident when me and my friend tried to sneak out of detention. We got caught right behind the tennis court and had to sit another hour," reminisced Gracie and they all started laughing. "I played tennis once, in Kentwood when I was 7. I had no idea what I was doing but it was so much fun," added Yvette while the girls were laughing. "Where is that?" asked Francesca. "In Louisiana, America. I used to go there a lot when I was younger," replied Yvette as she remembered her past. "America? That's so cool," said Gracie turning to Yvette. "Yeah, when I was young we used to travel a lot. Me, my mom and my dad," she added as the food arrived. The girls started dishing out for themselves and Gracie instinctively went for the barbecue. Yvette noticed that Francesca wasn't eating anything, all she drank was some juice which she was pouring salt into. This concerned her a bit. "Aren't you hungry? We have tennis tryouts in an hour and you should eat something," said Yvette to Francesca as she kept pouring salt into her juice. "Salt with juice makes for a meal, my mom always used to tell me that," said Francesca, and Yvette went on to eat her food. Soon the girls went back to their boarding house to get into sport gear and were off to the sports fields to join the queues of hopefuls trying out for tennis and basketball. The sports arena was huge, the tennis courts probably spanned a mile, and the tryouts for basketball were inside the school gymnasium. As usual, the girls and boys were completely separate, since the sports fields for the girls were behind the school and sports fields for the guys were on the outside of their boarding home. The girls were sent to wait on the pavilions while the final years tried out. "Soon it's going to be our turn and I have no idea how to hold the racket," said Yvette, and they left. Francesca soon came to the field and moved to where Gracie and Yvette were sitting. The girls hardly noticed her when she walked by, but those that did gave her filthy looks, and anyone could see those looks piercing right through her being. Gracie noticed this and understood that being fat was more than a lifestyle. In high school it seemed to be a curse. Francesca got to where they were seated and Yvette pointed out to her that the teachers were trying out the final year girls first. They sat there joking about the funniest things that could happen during tryouts, and Francesca explained to them what tennis was all about. After a while it was the turn of the first year girls to try out for tennis, and Gracie ran to the queue with excitement. All sorts of girls were trying out for tennis and it seemed that they all knew what they were doing. When Gracie's turn came, she did more or less what she saw the other girls doing and she made the team. Yvette also made the team, but Gracie had no idea why, since she was barely hitting the ball and she kept falling. They were both thrilled to be on the team since many girls didn't make it. Soon it was Francesca's turn to try out, and just as Gracie had thought she was the best player there. The teachers in charge of electing the players for the tennis team seemed to have a hard time deciding whether or not they should let her in, but soon decided to take out one of the girls that made the team and put Francesca in. "I knew you'd make it," yelled Gracie, running to Francesca. All three of them made the team that day and Gracie was happy about that. The girl that got pulled out of the team was a really lousy player at that, probably worse than Yvette. She was, however, a really pretty girl with a very slim body, and Gracie noticed that certain prejudices seemed to govern the society that she lived in. That many people were given the benefit of the doubt merely because of how they looked. She had always been really thin for her age, and she had begun to notice that things could have been a lot different for her if she wasn't. "We have tryouts for the swimming team tomorrow, and I heard Rosa Maria is on one of the swimming teams," said Gracie as they were walking to the sport hall for basketball tryouts. "I just can't get over the cute dresses they have for the female basketball team, it's priceless," laughed Yvette as they passed by posters of the basketball teams over the years. "No trousers for women, I think that's always been Camelthorn code," added Gracie as they got into the big hall full of girls trying out. Surprisingly, Yvette was much better at the basketball audition since she was the only one of them that made the team for first years. Most of the other girls that made that team were about as tall as Yvette was. After that they ran to the posh first-year showers and started getting ready for dinner. All the girls marched to their dining hall in almost perfect order. First years seemed to be getting better at this. Yvette noticed Francesca disappeared behind the fountains as soon as the girls got to the dining hall. Rosa Maria was asking the children where she was, but Yvette decided not to tell her. She told Gracie, however, and after dinner they went to look for her. "Here she is," yelled Gracie once she had found Francesca sitting on the steps leading to big hall where kids assembled in the mornings. Yvette ran to where they were as soon as Gracie said that, and they sat with her on the steps. It was getting darker, so they decided to head back to their boarding house. Gracie had never really anticipated what was going to happen next. As they were walking past the boys near the dining hall, the boys started making horrible sounds at Francesca. Gracie was trying to look at the faces of the boys who were saying those things to Francesca. "Hey Miss Piggy, Kermit the Frog is looking for you," yelled one of the boys at Francesca, who was red in the face. Yvette ran to the boarding house. This all seemed too scary for her. Francesca stopped walking for a while and started crying, but Gracie kept pulling at her arm so they could get out of there. "They are offering seconds at the dining hall, fatty, don't miss your chance," yelled another boy, and they kept laughing with some of the guys making farting noises and imitating Francesca. Francesca kept crying and they soon got to the boarding house. Rosa Maria was standing at the doors when they got there. She had seen it all. "Gracie, I want you to tell Miss Jurgens the names of those boys. They are from first year, aren't they?" said Rosa Maria in a shaking tone. This all seemed to have angered her. "Some of them are, I know 3 of them," said Gracie as she started remembering the faces of the boys. Francesca hugged Gracie and ran to their dorm room crying. After that Rosa Maria took Gracie to Miss Jurgens' house near the female boarding home. It was very neatly decorated and looked like a house you'd find in a posh suburb. She had just finished cooking and her children were playing outside when she called them in for dinner. Gracie saw them for the first time. One of them was the blonde girl who played the piano at morning assembly. The other one was a little boy with spiky brown hair. She called Rosa Maria and Gracie to her lounge so they could explain to her everything that had happened. Gracie told her about the boys that she did remember but hardly knew their names. She talked with Rosa Maria after that and said she would let the male prefects know. Then she got on her phone while Rosa Maria and Gracie quietly left for their dorm. Once they reached their dorm room, the girls were doing each other's hair and some were jumping on their beds. "You have an hour before the lights go off, study sessions will only begin tomorrow. Don't get tattoos or jump out of windows before I get back," yelled Rosa Maria as she went to her room. The girls locked at that and kept conversing and hanging out on each other's beds. Francesca was already asleep and Gracie went to sit on Yvette's bed. "I wish I told those boys off for doing that, I'm probably taller than most of them," said Yvette, and Gracie giggled. "I went with Rosa Maria to the J's house, we told her everything. I think she's gonna tell Mr. Andrews," said Gracie as she looked out of the window from the bed. "So I thought about something today, when I ran back to our dorm room. Memories came flooding my mind," said Yvette, looking across the room at Francesca sleeping. Gracie looked at Yvette and didn't say anything. "Was after my father had died," said Yvette, and Gracie was startled by the fact that she had brought that subject up. "Your father is dead? Is that why you didn't want to bring him up, when Lily Clark was talking to you at the dining hall the other day?" replied Gracie as she was reminiscing. "Yeah, he died when I was 10. He got eaten by sharks, I saw it happen," said Yvette as tears started filling her eyes. Gracie put her hand over her mouth and she noticed some of the girls on the nearby bed staring at them. They could probably hear everything, so Gracie got up and took Yvette's hand. They walked to a quiet place outside and sat on a log. Yvette was still whipping away her tears that seemed to have a mind of their own. "He had died that night. I was on a table in the middle of the sea with my mother that entire night. In the morning she woke up, I was asleep when she did cause I was so tired. She saw a ship coming by our direction and she thought that if she could make enough noise they would stop and see us. She told me that," began Yvette as she was telling Gracie about one of the most haunting days of her life. "Still remember it all, it's a very vivid memory. I woke up because of the noise. My mother had taken off her wristwatch and started banging it on the broken table we were lying on. She yelled for help and while she was doing that I woke up. She made a lot of noise and I started screaming for help along with her. Soon they saw us. They turned the ship around and came to save us. I thought I would have forgotten it all by now," she said, and Gracie was at a loss of words. They sat there for a while. It didn't seem like anyone had noticed that they were gone. A long silence passed between them and they went back to their dorm room when they saw that it was getting darker. The next day would be the tryouts for the swimming team and Gracie thought that was something to be excited about. When they got to their dorm room the lights were off but almost all the kids were busy texting on their phones and taking selfies. Gracie got into her jammies when a girl came to her and asked her to take a selfie with her. It was one of the girls. "Just want to take a selfie of both of us in our nightgowns. Yours is so trendy, by the way, I love it. What's your name again?" she asked as she took the selfie and posted it on her completely pink Girl Space 88 page. "I'm Gracie," replied Gracie as the girl was typing a caption. Gracie read the caption and giggled. It read, "In our nighties about to sleep, Gracie rocks thirks. My name is Alicia, by the way," she said, sort of announcing her presence. With a classical wave of her long brown hair she was gone and Gracie giggled about it all. Guess some people were always on social media for reasons beyond Gracie's understanding. Till now she had never really understood what Girl Space 88 was and for a while she had thought that it was a country. The next day at school Miss Jurgens called some grade 8 boys to the stage and Gracie was called to remember the ones that teased Francesca. They were mostly from grade 8C and B. She only pointed out those she remembered and Francesca hadn't come to school that day. The principal gave them all detention and the school choir was called to the stage. Gracie had no idea that people made such a big deal about bullying at Camelthorn cause at her old school bullying was never punished. She remembered a girl in 4th grade trying to kill herself because she got bullied there. She was found before she had bled to death and survived, but never were her bullies brought to account. In a way she felt relieved that at Camelthorn such situations got addressed. Assembly went on as usual and today they would have their other subjects introduced to them. The bell rang and the children started walking out of the hall in their Ks. Our first subject for today is Bible study, in room 18. I know this is the oldest Christian academy on earth, but are we allowed to have that as a subject? Asked Yvette as they got out of the hall and left their K. They say here it is to prepare those students who want to get employment in ministry as pastors or bishops. We get an official certificate for each year we do this subject. How awesome is that? Replied Gracie as they strolled to room 18. I think we have to go downstairs for that one, said Yvette, and they took the stairs down to room 18. When they got to the Bible study class, half the class was already there, and this time there was a teacher in the class, Mr. Andrews. They took their places somewhere in the middle of class. The students were all unfamiliarly quiet and behaved as Mr. Andrews was going through his Bible. Soon all the children got to the class, and Mr. Andrews finally looked up from his ancient Bible that had a very old leather covering over it. He ran his fingers through his large beard as he studied the children in the class for a while. He then stood up and introduced himself. After that he began telling the children a very ancient story about the subject and where the biblical Hebrew manuscripts were first discovered. The bell rang and the children were off to their next class. Gracie half expected it to be a science subject or something new, but to her surprise her next class was physical training. This subject is the greatest thing anyone has ever invented, yelled one of the sport fanatic girls. Yvette brought 5 matching pink tops for us to wear, said Lily to the rest of the girls as they were walking to the P.T class, holding each other's hands and giggling. It says the P.T class is in the school gymnasium, room 41. And here I am thinking we're going to be running around outside, said Yvette as they were taking the stairs to the school gymnasium. They got to the gymnasium and some of the kids let out sighs as they beheld its majestic size. It was like the biggest playground anywhere. They ran to the lockers to take off their uniforms. Gracie, Yvette, and some other kids had no idea about this and decided to do P.T in their school uniforms. All the girls were prepared for this of course and wore matching glitter dresses with pink tops. Who wears anything with glitter on it? Asked one of the sports chicks as Lily and her friends were walking out of the locker rooms. The sports teacher was a man, Mr. Kozongam, in a blue tracksuit with a cap on. He spoke at Giharero with some of the children, so Gracie knew that he was Namibian. He made the children run around the gym a couple of times and do some basketball. As soon as that period was over it was recess and then on to economical studies. Soon the school was out and the first years started moving to their dorm room when Gracie saw Francesca at last. She was putting on her uniform to make it appear as if she did go to school. Rosa Maria saw this but said nothing about it. Lunch is in less than 2 hours, girls, start getting ready, yelled Rosa Maria as the girls were discussing their homework. So, why didn't you go to school today? Asked Gracie as Francesca was putting her shoes on. Was a bit hungry, thought I would save my energy, she replied as she tied her hair in a messy pigtail. Lunch was great and Francesca ate with them since she had obviously skipped breakfast. Gracie wasn't too concerned about that since she couldn't wait for tennis practice later that day. They got their sports gear on as soon as lunch was over and were off to the sports fields. Gracie and Yvette ran to the food stand right near the sports field and got one hamburger that they would share since that was practically all that they could afford. There were also some guys at the food stand whistling at Lily and the other girls as usual. When Gracie and Yvette went to sit at the pavilion they noticed Francesca had showed up in really oversized sports gear. They didn't think much of it and continued eating their hamburger before practice began. If you could design the perfect tennis gear, would you go for a glittered top or a pink top? Asked Yvette as she pointed to one of Lily's friends, Alicia, who was wearing glitter all over her clothes it seemed. They locked and were interrupted by a girl screaming. They turned to see one of the guys pushing Francesca to the ground and another guy telling him to take it easy. Francesca got up and ran to the dorm while the guys locked as she ran. Gracie and Yvette were about to go after her but the teachers had arrived and the practice session had begun. They had to jog around the sports field, which Gracie felt was much easier after having downed half a burger. The tennis practice was great since all the girls got a chance to play. The teachers were a bit concerned that Francesca wasn't there since she was the best player on their team. As soon as the session was over the girls had to run to their showers and get ready for supper. Gracie noticed once again that Francesca wasn't in the dining hall during supper and felt a bit concerned. Attention first years, the study sessions will commence after supper, said Mr. Andrews as he addressed the first years. As soon as Gracie was done she got her school bag and searched for the study hall with Yvette. Do you think we're lost? She asked as they walked down the hall in search of the study hall. I think it's down that corridor, said Yvette as they walked down the corridors searching. On to an interesting question I've been wanting to ask you, said Gracie as they took the stairs down. Ask away, said Yvette as she was putting on her cell phone torchlight. Where exactly are you from? I don't think I've ever heard of anyone with your surname, said Gracie through the thick darkness. Well, the story goes like this. My dad used to tell me of this when I was a kid. He said that his father was an Apache Indian. He settled in South Africa and the local Afrikaners called him Van Rooyen because of his tan skin. That's basically how we got our surname, said Yvette as they moved further down the dark corridor. You have an awesome family. I think this is a dead end, said Gracie as they reached the end of the corridor. They spent a while looking for the study room and eventually found it on the third floor. The evening went by smoothly and the next few weeks of school was everything Gracie had expected from Camelthorn High. They had to grow a tree in the agricultural studies class using only banana peel fertilizer, which Gracie thought was awesome since Henry Bannister was in her group and he pretty much did everything. Mr. Andrews taught them the 10 Commandments in Bible study class, which was the highlight of Gracie's year since she had only ever heard about their existence. In economical studies they learned about what caused the Great Depression and were given assignments on drawing economical budgets that would prevent a future depression. Gracie spent hours online looking for ways to set up a nationwide budget and eventually got help from Yvette, who had found one on Google. She thought that assignment was the coolest homework they could get. In P.T. classes they learned to swim, which Gracie thought was a great idea since boys and girls had separate swimming pools. Tomorrow is midterm break, how awesome is that, said one of the sport fanatic chicks as they were moving to recess. Year flew by, didn't it, said Gracie to Yvette as they were looking for a place to sit. Where are you going for midterm? Since we both live in Windhoek, why don't you come over to my house for midterm, asked Yvette. That will be awesome. Thanks girl, I'll ask my parents about that, said Gracie as she hugged Yvette. Soon she called her parents, who didn't have much of a problem with that. When midterm came, her parents came to the school to sign her out for midterm and she went home with Yvette and her mom. Yvette's place seemed like every teenager's dream. She lived in an apartment with her mom, who was like the coolest mom ever. Their curfew was at 7, so they'd wake up early and spend most of the day in town. Her mom let them eat anything and jump on the beds if they felt like it. Gracie thought Yvette had the coolest life, but she also wanted to know if that's how she felt. So Miss Yvette, are you ready for the interview? Asked Gracie as she held a toy microphone to her mouth while they were playing dress up with Yvette's mom's evening gowns. Oh well then, if you must, she replied as she sat on the bed and giggled. Question 1, do you prefer fish over barbecue? Gracie asked, putting the microphone to Yvette's mouth. Barbecue fish, best of both worlds, she answered, as she pretended to speak into the toy microphone. Nice save, replied Gracie, and they locked. Question number 2, why did the chicken cross the road? She continued. To get away from KFC, answered Yvette as she grabbed the KFC box they had bought earlier and started eating the leftover chips. Question number 3, do you think Barbie will ever marry Ken? Asked Gracie as she started pondering that question herself. No, I don't think so, they make more money when they are sold separately, so I doubt Barbie will ever marry Ken. Deep question though, she answered, and they both locked at that. Final question, said Gracie, and she took a while to continue cause she wasn't sure if Yvette was ready to answer that question. Do you ever miss your dad? She concluded in a more serious tone. Yvette swallowed the chips in her mouth and thought hard about that question. She hadn't thought about it much for a while. Sometimes, but I hardly remember him. All I remember is the day that he died. My mom hardly brings him up. She responded, almost as if she was trying to remember as much about the topic as she could. Yvette's mom closed the door behind her. She seemed to have heard what they were talking about. Yvette, those are really expensive gowns you are playing with. I went to the State House dinner in that dress, you know. It was New Year's Eve 1998, said Yvette's mom as she started reminiscing. Wow, Miss Van Rooyen, what was it like in the 90s? Asked Gracie as she was taking off the blue evening gown she had been playing in. Well Gracie, the 90s were the best years. By the way, I wore that blue dress on the night that I got engaged. That was in July, 2001, I still remember it like it was yesterday, she said with very longing eyes. Yvette's dad had just learned how to drive and we were stuck in traffic for most of that day because he kept getting lost. He finally decided to propose to me in the car, in the middle of traffic. Many cars were blowing their horns so we could move out of the way, but he had decided to propose there and then. I think that was one of the best days of my life. Soon after I had said yes, he received a ticket for holding up the traffic, she said with a smile on her face, and they locked. Gracie and Yvette went to bed late that night. They stayed up playing video games and eventually got their blankets from the room, falling asleep in front of the screen. All that month Gracie got to know Yvette's mom and met some other members of her family. When midterm break got to an end they drove to the Camelthorn bus terminal. The J made sure that all the children opened their mouths really wide when they entered the bus, so she could tell if they were chewing gum or not. It was a joy for Gracie to see all the foreign children again. She could almost tell where they had been just by looking at them. The girls seemed to have spent their entire holiday tanning and they all seemed to be working really hard to remove their nail polish before the J saw their manicured hands. One of the girls, Christina, had started throwing her jewelry out of the windows cause she knew she'd get detention if the J saw them. A girl from the sport fanatic chicks, Gwen, had partook in a marathon and was describing the race like she had been in a movie. I felt really tired as we got to the end of the race, but I knew I had to put in a few more good strides because victory was only a few miles away. You should have seen me. I ran with all I had in me that day and it felt like I was on top of the world when I crossed that finish line," said Gwen as the rest of the sport fanatic chicks stared at her in complete awe. One of the chess boys was discussing some chess tournament in London that he had attended and the bookworm kids were discussing the above average grades they had received in all their subjects. Gracie saw Francesca Pinto with them and waved at her. She noticed that Francesca was looking a lot thinner, almost as if she had shrunk. "Who are you waving at?" asked Yvette as she looked over to Gracie. "Francesca, remember Francesca Pinto?" she replied, and Yvette started waving at her as well. She also seemed to have noticed how much weight Francesca had lost but didn't say much about it. As soon as they got to the school they moved directly to their dorm room where Rosa Maria was busy unpacking her bags. Gracie noticed all the fourth-year girls seemed to be locked out of their dorm room and some were sleeping on top of their suitcases. Soon Una Sheriff came with the keys for the fourth-year dorm room and they went in. The girls started getting ready for the dining hall. Some got the key from Rosa Maria and went to freshen up in the bathrooms. "The majestic Camelthorn bathrooms, if only my sister could see this," said Gracie as they got to the bathroom. "Then take a picture," said Yvette as she started brushing her hair. "Good idea, Yvette," she said and immediately ran to get her camera. As soon as she got to the dorm room she saw Francesca putting on her pajamas. "Are you going to bed this early? Dining hall is in 20 minutes and I doubt Rosa Maria will let you skip that," she said as she searched for her old camera in one of her purses. "I asked her permission. I'm a bit tired and I think I'm going to sleep early," she said as she got under her blankets. "Would you like me to bring you anything from the dining hall? I'm sure they have doggy bags," asked Gracie once she had found the camera. "No thanks, I'm not very hungry," answered Francesca and turned around to sleep. Gracie quickly ran back to the showers and started taking pictures of the beauty around her, leaving her only enough time to wipe her face. The girls formed a K and headed for the dining hall with Rosa Maria making two girls from America wipe the glitter lip gloss off of their lips. At dining hall the name of the kids who had gotten into the final sports teams were read. Gracie had gotten into the swimming team and Yvette had made the basketball team. As soon as they got out of the dining hall they saw a group of children next to the tennis fields and they thought they'd go there and see what the commotion was all about. "And this bag is made of pure leather. I got it in Australia on sale, bidding starts at $80, yelled Penny Baxter as she was auctioning what seemed like a really posh backpack. Children were screaming out different prices and one of them finally won the bid at $150. Gracie and Yvette looked at this and started counting their money to see if they could buy anything in the auction. Penny pretty much sold about anything and even auctioned off a very well polished but old pencil case to a third-year girl for $40. As soon as they saw a prefect coming the children started running back to their dorms, but Gracie and Yvette hid behind the pavilion to see what would happen. He was the Asian prefect, Akiyama Hamasaki. Penny was hurriedly trying to pack her items back into her suitcase when the prefect reached her. "What are you selling this time, Penny?" asked Akiyama as he started to lock. "Anything you want to buy, sir. I have some shampoo on discount as well," she said as she quickly pulled out a small bottle of designer shampoo she had probably found in a hotel bathroom somewhere. $20, no higher," he said as he locked, so she sold him the shampoo for that much. "Penny Baxter, at your service, sir," she concluded as she shook his hand and ran off to the boarding home, pushing her money into her bra. Gracie and Yvette looked hysterically at all of this as they ran after her and into the boarding home before the dorm doors were locked. That night they had the back-to-school gathering in the girls' dorm. Gracie was told that it was something that they did at the end of every midterm break. She met the twins from Denmark again that night, Sasha and Natasha. "Welcome back you two, we have this after every midterm break and it's totally fun," said Natasha as Gracie and Yvette walked towards them when they got to the gathering. This is the coolest thing Camelthorn has come up with, added Sasha as she threw a marshmallow into her mouth. Gracie and Yvette sat down next to them and watched as the children walked into the gathering, some sitting on the ground and others leaning against the wall. There were large tables full of all kinds of snacks, and Gracie decided to put some of the cookies in her bag for Francesca since she was still asleep. They had a great gathering and heard many interesting tales. The highlight of the evening was the part where Rosalinda Montabelle was telling everyone about how she had met a celebrity at an airport in Ukraine. By the end of the evening everybody had probably heard that story more than 5 times. Rosa Maria also announced that the girls' youth group for Christ would start meeting in the study during the weekends, since before then they would meet in one of the classrooms at the school. Gracie thought she'd attend it that weekend and find out what it's like. Soon after that the prefects started escorting the girls to their dorms, and Gracie gave Francesca the cookies she had collected for her. The next morning at assembly Mr. Andrews welcomed the children back to the school and told them a really interesting tale about an old man he had met that holiday. It was pretty deep and he told everybody about the lessons they could learn from others and all of that. Soon the children were told to rise as they sang ancient words while the prefects were handing out the Bibles. "Gracie, look. She made it," yelled Sasha as she pointed to Natasha on the stage with the choir. She had made it into the choir like she had wanted to. Natasha waved at them as they sang, and soon a boy from 4th year was called to the stage to read the Bible passage of the day, Matthew 16. After that some words in G. Herrero appeared on the screen and they started singing an old G. Herrero song that Gracie remembered from church. The choir was singing it as if they had rehearsed all year, and a lot of the children were singing along, which surprised Gracie a bit. Ombrero, Jawenchi pe anjou, hino kuyenina, o kuik jinda muhana. The trial that you gave me is hard, I am not able to carry it, Lord. They sang as they read the words from the screen at the front. Yvette was suddenly feeling uncomfortable for some strange reason, and Gracie couldn't understand why, so she kept singing. Yvette put her hand over her mouth and soon Gracie saw tears coming from her eyes. She couldn't understand this, and as they sang Yvette ran out of the hall with many of the children looking at her. O kukodokakov, and Jitharaparara muhana, miyuru, to return to you, have mercy on me, Lord, in heaven. They kept singing and Gracie struggled with whether she should go after Yvette or stay. She soon asked Sasha to come with her and they both went after Yvette but weren't sure where to look. They walked around for a bit and soon found her sitting against the fence at the tennis field and crying. They ran to where she was and Gracie hugged her. "What's the matter, Yvette, are you okay?" asked Sasha as she patted Yvette's hair. She looked up at them, attempting to wipe her tears with her school jersey. She wanted to say something but then continued crying, and soon the bell for the first period rang. She cleared her throat and began to speak. "That song, the song you were singing," she blurted out and kept crying. "The G. Herrero song? Natasha told me that they had practiced really hard to get the words right," said Sasha as the kids were moving around to their classes. "That song was playing on the radio, the night that my father died, it was playing on the radio. I remember it so well cause the radio was so loud," she said and continued to cry as a prefect approached them. Sasha was a bit shocked by what she heard and Gracie hugged Yvette again. The prefect that was walking towards them was the head boy, Junior Velasquez. Sasha told him what had happened and he told Gracie and Sasha to go to class while he talked with Yvette. Gracie saw them walk off together and ran to the human resource class since that was her first subject for the day. Ms. Brown had an interesting lesson for them that day. It was about staffing and recruitment with some of the children doing role play. Gracie loved that, and Yvette got to the class just as the lesson was about to finish. "What did I miss?" asked Yvette as the bell rang and the kids started moving to room 29 for economics. Miss Brown was teaching us about staffing and recruitment and Lily had to role play as the boss of a company trying to seek employees. Some of the kids got chances to apply for whatever post they wanted and so forth, explained Gracie as they walked through the busy halls of Camelthorn High. "That sounds so cool," replied Yvette, but Gracie thought she looked a bit sad. "So what did Junior say to you?" asked Gracie as they were entering the economics class. "I told him about my dad and he let me cry on his shoulder. He's cool," she answered once they got seats in the middle of the class. Most of the kids always ran for the best spots near the windows, so Gracie thought she would have to learn to move faster to get one of those coveted seats. Mr. Finnegan had a bunch of charts for the class to fill in, charts that were used by actual economists. Gracie thought that was really grown up and fun. Especially when they had to draw up a monthly household budget with only $4,000. She had fun with that since she had budgeted about $1,000 worth of candy. Mr. Finnegan looked at her budget, but she had received a good grade for it. The girls were really excited about the fact that their tennis, basketball, and swimming teams would travel to Windhoek to take part in a sports event between the first-year students of 5 prestigious schools. Gracie was thrilled about that, especially since Francesca had made the A-team for tennis and she was their best player by far. Yvette had also made the A-team for basketball, but Gracie had only made the A-team for swimming, and she thought that was odd since she had only learned to swim competitively that year. Since she was in the B-team for tennis, she would also get a uniform for that team, which she thought was really cool. All the sport fanatic chicks had made the A-teams in probably all the sports, with Gwen being the top of the swimming and running teams. That weekend came and the Camelthorn first-year sports teams flew to Windhoek a few days before the event since they would have to practice over there as well. Gracie was shocked at the fact that Camelthorn High had private planes, but what was more exciting was that she would be flying in a jet plane for the first time ever. She and Yvette took pictures of everything, including the food they served on a private jet, and eventually got Mr. Andrews to let them take pictures of the pilots. Once they got to Windhoek, they got booked into a really posh hotel. Gracie and Yvette were really excited about this cause they had really never been anywhere that grand before, and that was a 5-star hotel. They had to pick rooms in groups of 4, so they got Francesca and a Moroccan girl from the grade 8C class called Charity. "I'm so glad I got a room with you two, this is so awesome," said Francesca once she had put her bags down. "I know, right, we will totally stay up late and all that," exclaimed Gracie as she looked at her reflection in the giant mirror against the wall. "I don't think so, guys, we have to wake up at 8 a.m. tomorrow for team practice sessions," said Charity as she was unpacking some of her dresses into the wardrobe. "I think I'm going to take a bath before bed as well," added Francesca, and took off her giant jersey to reveal deathly thin arms. Everybody in the room was pretty much shocked at how thin Francesca had become, and Charity had stopped what she was doing to look at her gaunt figure. Francesca tied her hair in a bun and walked towards the showers with a towel over her shoulder. Yvette and Gracie looked at each other, not sure what to say. "I heard the guys used to make fun of her, when she was fat. Then Miss Jurgens gave them detention," said Charity as she started folding her clothes and packing them away again. "Yeah, I was the one that reported those boys," replied Gracie, still at a loss of words. Yvette didn't really comment on that, and they all got into their pajamas. That night they were told to sleep at 8, and some prefects came to see if their lights were off, namely Rosa Maria Velasquez, who was one of the head prefects for first years, and Jennifer Munganda, the head girl. As soon as the lights went off, Charity pulled out a flashlight and all the girls in the room ran to her bed. "Let's play a game. Try to imagine yourself in 10 years. Your time starts now, Gracie," she said as she pointed her flashlight to Gracie. "Wow, 10 years from now I'll probably be driving to work with a phone in one hand, yelling at my daughter to wash the dishes when she gets back from school," she said, imagining the scene in her mind. All the girls laughed at that, and it was Yvette's turn next. Charity shone the flashlight on her face and she began. 10 years from now I'll be brushing my teeth with apple juice while my husband, some famous actor, is watching the news about how I created the world's first paper aircraft that didn't catch fire during takeoff," said Yvette, and everyone burst out laughing after she had said that. They soon grew quiet as they heard Rosa Maria down the hall telling girls to put off their lights. Next was Francesca's turn, and Charity shone the flashlight on her face. 10 years from now I'll probably be giving a speech at the United Nations about ending world hunger. I'll be much older and won't look at my feet when I'm giving a speech anymore," said Francesca, and the girls locked cause everyone knew she always stared at her feet when a teacher would ask her a question. Finally it was Charity's turn, and she shone the flashlight on her own face. 10 years from now I'll be winning souls for Jesus. I always wanted to be a missionary, and that's why my parents brought me to Camelthorn," concluded Charity, and everyone applauded her. She seemed to have a very clear idea of where she wanted to be with her life, and soon Rosa Maria came to their room. She told them that they were making noise and should sleep, so they all ran to their beds. As soon as it was 8 o'clock, girls were told to wake up by the prefects, and they quickly took a bath with some just changing clothes and getting ready. They were all given hot dogs and Coke, which Gracie thought was the coolest breakfast ever. They could hardly bear the incredible heat, but soon found some shade under a tree and sat there to eat. Francesca didn't eat though. She had put the food in her backpack and was off to the tennis field practicing with one of the other girls on the A team. She was really good, and soon the other students gathered around to watch her. It didn't seem to bother them that she was playing with a huge jersey on in the scorching heat of Windhoek. Soon the teachers called the swimming teams to practice in Olympia, and the basketball teams went with them. The 2 days leading to the games they repeated this process, and everyone was really excited about their chances this year. "This is it, you guys, the day of the epic games. Heard the stadiums are already full, exclaimed Charity as the girls were getting ready. They had woken up really early that morning so that they could be ready by 7 a.m., when the games would begin. Their principal had rented some fancy buses for them to use and they managed to get to the sports fields before 7 a.m. All the kids were there already. They saw the teams from DHPS, WHS and many other prestigious schools there. The girls were so excited, merely because of the sheer number of people in the audience and the few cameras that were there. The event would be broadcasted live and the children were told to walk in their sport groups. Gracie noticed that most of the girls from other schools wore jewelry and hair extensions which none of the Camelthorn girls were allowed to wear, and it felt like they were from a secluded farm and had just entered the real world. Since she had made 2 teams, she would be wearing her swimming suit for the swimming and later have to change into her tennis outfit because she was in the B team. Yvette's team was the first. They would compete against DHPS and Gracie was cheering them on. The game ended at a draw, which Gracie thought was a miracle since DHPS seemed better prepared for the game. She had to go for swimming soon while the other games were in session. She saw many kids doing high jump, long jump, and other athletics. When her turn for swimming came, she got 3rd place in the breaststrokes and 5th place in relay, which meant a lot to her since everybody else knew what they were doing and she was pretty much clueless. "I don't think we will be able to afford any of these snacks. I saw them selling hot dogs for $20 back there," said Yvette as she and Gracie were walking to the tennis courts. "There's Francesca. Charity told me she had won 3 matches today," said Gracie as they were reaching the courts. "I am not surprised. She's usually the first to get to the tennis court and the last to leave," added Yvette as they went to sit by the fence since all the chairs were filled. It was the semi-finals and Francesca would be playing against a girl from the Windhoek private school. Everybody was cheering loudly as soon as the 2 players came out. Gracie was very shocked when Francesca took off her jersey. Her arms were much thinner than they had been before and her legs looked like sticks under her tennis skirt. Yvette let out a gasp as Francesca tied her hair in a bun, revealing her extremely bony neck. Gracie and Yvette stood up and started cheering for Francesca with the crowd since everybody was expecting her to win. The whistle blew and the match began. She hit the first few balls well, but after a while she looked like she was getting dizzy. "Rock on, Francesca, show them what you've got," yelled Yvette from behind the fence with other Camelthorn students cheering Francesca on. Francesca put her hand on her forehead. This was when people had began to notice that something was wrong. Everybody was yelling one thing or another, but all that Francesca could see were blurry images. She dropped her racket to the ground and started rubbing her eyes. No one understood what was going on. "This doesn't look good," said Gracie to Yvette as the entire audience watched her rubbing her eyes. The referee blew her whistle to call for a timeout and Rosa Maria walked up to Francesca to ask her if she was okay. Francesca kept swerving and rubbing her eyes. She couldn't seem to be making sense of what was going on around her. "Are you okay?" asked Rosa Maria again as she got closer to Francesca. Francesca looked at her and all of a sudden everything went black. She dropped to the ground, her eyes still wide open. Rosa Maria screamed and paramedics ran to the scene. Gracie and Yvette had no idea what was happening, so they ran onto the tennis court to see whether Francesca was okay. 2 of the paramedics ran to get a stretcher and one of them was trying to resuscitate her. She grew pale and her eyes were still wide open. That image scared Gracie immensely and she looked away. People had started running to the tennis court to see what was going on and some of the kids had ran to call Mr. Andrews. Many people had gathered around Francesca by now and Gracie could hardly see a thing. She turned around and saw Mr. Andrews and a few other teachers rushing to the courts. When Gracie looked back to the scene, all she could see was the shock on many faces. Then she saw it. For that moment it seemed as if the entire world was looking at what she was looking at. 2 of the paramedics carrying away a stretcher with Francesca on it, a pale white cloth covering her entire body. She was dead. Not Francesca. Gracie wasn't ready to accept the death of someone she had been so close to. She couldn't seem to understand what was going on. She looked over to Yvette, who had her hand over her mouth and was crying. This was really happening. It was sudden, but it was real. Soon after that the games drew to an end and the Camelthorn teams drove back to their hotel, having won 2nd place in the event. Not much was said the rest of that afternoon, and later that night Mr. Andrews called all the children to the hotel lounge where they held a memorial service for Francesca. Soon after that they were told to pack their bags and get ready for the return flight the next day. "And life goes on just well for them, doesn't it?" said Yvette as she pointed to 3 of the guys who had bullied Francesca when she was fat. "Life will always go on, Law of nature, replied Gracie as they were walking back to their room with Charity. Just like Francesca, wasn't it, always pushing herself harder. Guess she pushed herself too hard this time, added Charity, tears streaming down her face. They flew back to Camelthorn the next day, and by the time they got there everyone had already heard of what took place in Windhoek. Many girls had gathered around Gracie and Yvette's beds to ask about the tennis match that ended Francesca's life. Charity had gone to bed early that day and half the dorm room was in tears. Rosa Maria started clearing Francesca's bed and collecting her belongings for her family. At the Girls' Youth Group for Christ meeting they read about the New Jerusalem in Revelations 22. Gracie and Yvette drew pictures of what it must look like in the New Jerusalem and sent them around the room while Rosa Maria was reading the scripture. Once they got back to their dorm, Francesca's empty bed was the first thing that caught Gracie's attention. It all seemed like a bad dream that she wasn't waking up from. Rosa Maria called Gracie to her room as soon as she got back to the dorm. Gracie closed the door and wondered what it could be. I found this amongst Francesca's belongings, I thought you would find it interesting, she said, and passed Gracie Francesca's old diary. She pointed out a page for Gracie to read and she read it. Tears came to Gracie's eyes as she read it and she looked at Rosa Maria to see that she was crying as well. Gracie knew that people needed to hear that, they needed to understand. She didn't know how she would let them know what Francesca wrote in her diary, but she was sure she would find a way. The next day at school they had agricultural studies, so Gracie took a detour to the school hall while all the other children walked to the school gardens. When she got into the school hall it was completely empty. She decided to walk to the stage and imagined what it must be like speaking in front of the entire school from the stage. She imagined that all the empty chairs were filled and that she had to give a speech about Francesca. She grabbed the microphone from the stand and turned it off so that no one would hear that she was there. She cleared her throat and began her make-believe speech. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come here to remember a girl that made us all think about how we treat others. A girl that made us remember that every word we speak has an effect on someone else, whether we know it or not. She said as she wiped the tears from her eyes, her voice trembling. We have come here to remember Francesca Pinto, a girl who was about to change the world with a tennis racket and a heart of gold. We have come here to remember that the good die young, and that we shouldn't waste a moment with them while they're here, she concluded, and cried the tears she couldn't hold inside of her anymore. Someone from the audience gave an applause. She quickly wiped her tears to see who it was, and to her amazement it was Henry Bannister. She remembered him from class and wondered how he had found her there. Henry walked up to her and gave her a couple of tissues from his shirt pocket. Thanks, she said, blowing her nose and whipping her tears. I heard the news this morning, no one in class has said a word since it was announced, he said, looking out at the empty hall. He turned to Gracie, who was still in tears. He gave her a smile, hoping it would make her feel better. She smiled back and almost instinctively he hugged her. They stood there in silence as Gracie saw her tears wetting his blazer. The bell rang and Gracie quickly moved back from him. We have Bible study now. I think we have a test today, he said, and reality suddenly rushed back to Gracie when she realized she hadn't studied for it. They both rushed to the Bible study class in room 18. Mr. Andrews had not forgotten about the test and Gracie felt like she was the only person who had not studied for it. Who on earth forgets to read their Bible, she thought as she wrote the test. After that they had recess. Their last subject for the day was human resource management, and Miss Brown had heard about what happened in Windhoek. She decided to give the class a distraction from that and gave them an assignment. They had to write poetry, and the best poet in class would win a ticket to Jamaica with Miss Brown that December. Everybody was really excited about the competition and they had a week to come up with something that was good enough. This is going to be interesting, won't it? Said Yvette to Gracie as they walked back to their dorm. Totally, whoever wins that will have a really good Christmas, won't they? Replied Gracie. And I'm sure Miss Brown has a really cool house with bangles hanging from the doorposts or something, said Yvette as she started imagining what a Jamaican home must look like. They spent that week sharing ideas with everyone they knew in hopes of coming up with a poem that was good enough for the competition. Yvette had eventually resorted to writing a poem about soap since Penny Baxter was in the bathroom selling soap she had bought in America, for $50, she had only bought the soap for $1 each though. Gracie had no idea what her poem would be about. She really wanted to honor Francesca's memory but had no idea how to write poems. The week in which they would read their poems would be the last week of the school year and Gracie was excited about that. Whether she would spend the holiday in Jamaica with Miss Brown or whether she would be going home for the holidays was hanging on that week. When the day of the poetry came, they would spend recess as well as the period after that in Miss Brown's class. Everybody could speak of nothing but their poems in the days leading up to it. As the children got to the Human Resource Management class, Gracie and Yvette ran for the coveted seats near the windows that all the children seemed to pine for. They sat down and watched as the other children were entering and rushing for the remaining places near the windows. It was one of the girls, Lily's friend, who would read her poem first, and everybody looked as Miss Brown was making her take off her eyeliner. "No makeup at Camelthorn, you know that, Christina. Now wash that off," she said as Christina ran to the bathrooms to wash off her eyeliner. In the meantime, she asked one of the guys to read his poem while they waited for Christina. He was Lawrence, one of the guys from the group who talked with purely American accents and apparently thought they were on a reality show, what Penny had said as she was introducing the students to Gracie. Gracie looked at the memory as he stepped forward to read his poem. "So the other day I was cruising down the street, when all of a sudden it began to drizzle. And I was like, for shizzle? For real? My hair was on fleek, my clothes was all chic. I was like, I look way too fresh for this mess." He was about to continue, but Miss Brown told him to stop and return once he has learned how to use proper grammar. The class was laughing through this all, and one of his friends gave him a high five. Next it was Christina's turn, who of course blew air kisses to all of her girl friends before she read a really long and boring poem about the cuteness of Mr. Fluffles, the autobiography of a cat. Soon Lily and her other friends were asked to share their poems as well, and just as everybody had thought, it was about cats. By the end of that hour, everybody had probably heard every kind and endearing word a person could say about a cat. Some other children also shared their poems, with one of the chess legend boys giving an overdramatic description of a chess match that ended in a draw. Penny's turn came, and Gracie was almost excited to hear what she had come up with. The class grew quiet as she walked to the front. "Penny Baxter, at your service, ma'am. $1 or $2, is what I'll get out of you. Cups and saucers or a pencil and pen. I'll sell you whatever, be it in euro or yen. I'll take cash, I'll take credit, check, or even debit. E.F.T, easy as ABC." "Really, Penny," said Miss Brown as the entire classroom was laughing. "I could polish your shoes, after I've sold them to you. 'Cause $1 or $2, is what I'll get out of you," she concluded, and took a bow as the entire classroom gave her a roaring applause. Miss Brown told the children to quiet down, and she called other students to the front. Yvette was up next with her poem about soap. The classroom was roaring with laughter as Yvette was describing the slippery, slimy soaps she has known. After that were a few boys with poems about their favorite pizza and other ridiculous things that kept the classroom laughing. Soon it was Gracie's turn, but she asked Miss Brown if she could be the last person to read since she wasn't ready yet. Miss Brown agreed to let her be the last to read and called other children to the front. Soon it was Henry Bannister's turn to read, and all the other chess boys cheered for him as he stood up. In his extremely English accent, he began to read his poem. "I could speak of nothing today. Let this moment pass away. It would be like I didn't exist. How I feel when you're near me." All the boys in the class started making funny noises at Henry, and some of the kids were blowing kisses. Miss Brown told them to keep quiet so that Henry could continue. "You're there and I'm here. Have no idea how to bring you near. I'm not sure how I'll keep making this poem rhyme. I could tell you that all we have is time. Time that's precious, time that's short. Time some people never had, but we still do. Why, I don't want to waste this moment. It might never come again. Wish I was brave enough to say your name. But I'm not, so I'll do something else instead. You'll find it somewhere, won't tell you where. A purple envelope with a heart in it. Something from this moment to you," he concluded, and half the girls in class started going through their bags and diaries, wondering if they were the mystery girl and would find a purple envelope somewhere in their bags. The guys looked at it all and kept blowing pretend kisses in the air. Gracie and Yvette looked at this as well. Finally it was Gracie's turn, and everyone was quiet again. She walked to the front of the class and pulled a diary out of her pocket. "I didn't really write a poem. If I did, it would probably be as boring as the cat poems, no offense intended," she said as she looked over to Christina. "I found something that I wanted to share with all of you instead, and I hope it counts," she said, and nervously turned towards Miss Brown, not sure if she'd be penalized for that. Miss Brown nodded her head and let her continue, so Gracie opened the diary. "I chose 3 final entries out of Francesca's diary. 4 days after the last entry she was dead. I cried when I first saw it, but I'll try not to cry today. I'll read 3 of her diary entries. November 3, 2016. A letter to my body. To my body, made in the image of God. Hope you're doing better after that blow that you took, after that boy decided to hit you cause you were fat. Seems like boys can get along with anything but fat. Or those girls who locked at you cause you couldn't fit into those skirts. Guess you'll have to stick to really long dresses, at least those never show fat. I'm not sure though, that anything I do means anything if I can't make you look really good. To my dear tummy, hope you don't growl so loudly tonight cause of the 3rd meal that I skipped. November 11, 2016. A letter to my body. If I can keep this up another day, I will be able to present you to the world without shame. Hang in there body, I'm almost perfect. November 15, 2016. A letter to my body. I started socializing again, it's better for me now that boys don't make horrible noises when I walk past them. It's great to be a human being again, and you're still holding up. After weeks and weeks of 1 square meal every day you're still doing fine. You even hold up when I'm playing tennis, I just don't know how much more time I have left to do that. I might have pushed you a bit too hard cause now my vision's getting blurry. I can hardly stand up straight these days, but against a wall I look fine. Please understand that you were created to obey me, and not the other way around. That's why, dearest body, we're skipping breakfast again tomorrow. P.S. We're also skipping lunch. Gracie moved back to her seat when she was done reading that. It was as if you could hear a needle drop in those few moments after she had sat down. The classroom was completely quiet and Miss Brown was in tears. A few moments later the bell rang and the children were told that the winner would be announced on the end-of-year assembly the next day. All the girls in the dorm spent that day packing their bags and running to each dorm room to give hugs to the prefects since this was their final year. Gracie and Yvette made a card for Rosa Maria and gave it to her that evening. They spent the rest of the evening in her room talking about what it would be like in the working world and she told them that she would be flying back to Spain that weekend. Everybody was really excited about finding out who the winner of the poem contest was and they all kept laughing at Yvette's poem about soap. The final day of the school year came and Gracie woke up very early that day. Almost everybody was talking about who would win the poem competition and what it would be like to spend Christmas in Jamaica. Gracie and Yvette were walking into the school hall when someone tugged at Gracie's arm. She turned around and saw Henry Bannister amongst the crowd of people entering the hall. "It's me, could we talk for a minute?" he asked and Gracie followed him out of the hall. "Hey Henry, last day of school feels great doesn't it?" she said as they walked further away from the hall. "Yes it does," he replied, almost not sure of what to say next. "I want to know, if you have any questions you would like to ask me? If you'd like me to explain things to you," he said, stuttering as he did. "Explain what?" she asked as they stopped near the water fountain. He searched her face and she looked at him in confusion. "Today Miss Brown is announcing the winner of the poem competition. I'm so excited to find out who the winner will be. My bets are on Lawrence," she said and they both looked at that. "Lawrence? Cruising through the drizzle? I don't think so, maybe Yvette and her soap," he remarked and they kept laughing. "I am gonna run to the hall now, it looks like it's filling up. Should I save you a seat?" she asked as she saw more and more children walking to the school hall. "That would be nice but you don't have to, I'll be there in a while," he replied in his proper way. After he had said that she was off to the school hall where she found Yvette who was seated next to Sasha. Gracie sat down next to them. "The final day of the school year, and of course, the last day of high school for our seniors. Give them a round of applause everyone," said Mr. Andrews and the children began to cheer for the final year students. "This morning we will be reading once more from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28 starting at verse 2. Raise your hands when you're there," he said as the prefects started handing out the Bibles. They sang the song Ancient Words as they received their Bibles. As soon as most of the children in the school hall had raised their hands, Mr. Brown began to read. "And all these blessings shall come on thee, and overtake thee, if thou shalt hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God. Blessed shalt thou be in the city, and blessed shalt thou be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of thy body, and the fruit of thy ground, and the fruit of thy cattle, the increase of thy kine, and the flocks of thy sheep. Blessed shall be thy basket and thy store." Read Mr. Andrews, and surprisingly all the kids in the school hall were reading along with him. "We read those 4 verses at the end of year assembly, the older kids told me that they did this every year," said Sasha as Mr. Andrews finished reading the scripture. Soon after that the choir came to the stage and sang a few songs that they had obviously been rehearsing quite hard for. Gracie kept looking at Natasha on the stage and Sasha, who was sitting beside her. She tried to figure out how she would ever tell the twins apart. Soon after that Miss Brown came to the stage and all the children cheered loudly. It seemed she had become everyone's favorite teacher that year. So this is the day of reckoning for grade 8B. Today I let ya know who is going home to Jamaica with me. Moment of truth, drum roll please. She yelled and the children started yelling out different names of who they thought would win. Penny Baxter. You're coming home to Jamaica with me this holiday. She yelled as she announced the winner. The children cheered as Penny walked to the stage and Miss Brown gave her a big hug. Everyone seemed pleased with that. Her poem was after all pretty classic. After that the prefects were called to the stage and each one had to give an end-of-year speech. Gracie loved that and wondered about how cool it must be to be 18 and done with high school. Mr. Andrews closed off the school year with a prayer and soon the doors were opened and the children were told to have a blessed holiday. Gracie and Yvette ran to get their suitcases and go to the Camelthorn bus with the other grade 8B students. Charity was one of the children who would be flying out of Namibia that day and she ran to give Gracie and Yvette a hug before their bus left since she was in a different class than them. They traveled to the Camelthorn busport that night and all the children that weren't flying out went to wait for their lifts at the gates. Gracie's parents soon came in their dusty old car that looked like it was falling apart. Gracie gave hugs to all her friends and told Yvette she would call her. Once she got into the car and started driving away, her parents asked her what the school year had been like and she told them about everything that had happened that year. She told them about Mr. Andrews, told them about Penny Baxter, she even told them about getting to fly on a private jet with the other children. Paige loved hearing these stories and wouldn't stop asking questions that entire trip. Once Gracie had reached the house she pushed her bags under the bed. Her mother was filling in some papers and asked Gracie if she had a black pen since the only pens she had with her were blue. Gracie went to look for the pen in her school bag and just as she reached for her pencil case she felt something against the side of the bag. She pulled it out and saw that it was a purple envelope. She opened it and found a red paper heart in it. This was all confusing to her. She turned the heart around and saw a message written very roughly in blue Koki pen. From Henry, from this moment to you. She read and started remembering the poem Henry had read. It all made sense now, she was the mystery girl Henry was talking about that day. She giggled at it all. This was probably the first time anything like that had happened in her life. The only other guy that ever liked her was a guy in primary school who had asked her to marry him at the school Valentine dance, and she ran home after he had said that. This made her lock a bit. Soon her mother called her again and she quickly took a black pen out of her pencil case and ran to give it to her. She couldn't wait for the next year to come. She wondered how it would be like in a new year of Camelthorn High. She also wondered if she had passed her subjects for that matter. She wondered about Henry and about Yvette, wondered if Penny was selling paper towels at the airport in Jamaica for $50 or if Lily and Christina had gone as far as buying matching clothes for their cats. She couldn't wait for what the next year held in store for her, but for now she was glad to be home. She was excited about returning to the ancient halls of Camelthorn. She was glad that she had been blessed with that opportunity and she was about to make the most of it.